Should we talk about what this podcast is about?
Maybe we skip that one, save that one for last. What's next on our list?
Welcome to Jack Ash Overanalyzed. I am Jack, he is Asher, and today we are talking about the interpretation of art. Let's get into it. I mean, dying is a way to end a career.
True.
It's just more permanent than others.
Yeah.
Though maybe not. You could, posthumously revive a career. Picasso knows all about that.
No, he doesn't.
No?
No.
I think he's more famous now than he was when he was alive.
Yeah, but he doesn't know about it.
Oh, so he couldn't tell you all about it. That's
Yeah.
It's poor choice of words by me.
Yeah, a little bit.
So curators could tell you all about that? Is that better?
Yes,
Okay.
That's very true.
Why is that a thing? Why do artists seem to get famous, at least historically, long after they're dead? What? I've never understood that.
I don't know, and I don't think it's not all of them, is it? Although I guess it is a majority, quite the majority.
I was going to say, I don't think it's all of them, but I think it is like the vast majority.
Well, I think part of that could be, if you look at, I don't know the last time you were in a modern art museum.
2 weeks ago?
Okay. Last time I was in a museum, I didn't really care for most of it. It was neat to see what people had done and stuff, but I was, you look around and I'm like, I just not sure I would display that or come back to see that. Like, it was neat to see what you accomplished with materials, or it was neat to see this or that, but a lot of it, I don't know.
I think my common reaction to modern art is it's sort of like that. I feel like I could have done that. Followed immediately by, yeah, but you didn't. Someone else did. It is that. It is a bit of a, for me, walking past exhibits and you're like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that took the same level of skill as some more historically prominent artwork, but at the same time, it is interesting. There's definitely stuff that I do appreciate, both in terms of level of skill and just overall quality. Like, even if it's not what I enjoy, I think it's a line I've used over and over from past art teacher, where it's like, even if you don't personally appreciate something, you can always appreciate the level of quality. And I think those are especially pertinent for him as a teacher, because I'm sure like there are students that create art that you don't necessarily prefer, even as like a teacher or just a general appreciator of art. But as a teacher, you have to, instead of just looking at the subject, you have to look at like, did the student use the technique or come up with the correct product that we're trying to teach, type of thing.
So here's a question. You mentioned quality as
Yes.
something you can appreciate, whether you'd hang it or not, right? Whether whether you care for the, I guess, topic or, in some cases, message, the quality is something you can look at and enjoy or appreciate. Could it be that quality that is what sustains something long enough to be great even after the historical context in which it was made is kind of gone? So like, you look at a lot of Da Vinci's or Picasso's work, and I don't know, I wasn't alive back then. Maybe it was too modern for them, and so it was like pushing the envelope too much. Maybe it was, some things in the past tried to send a message, and now looking at it, we don't care about the message. We just look at it and we're like, wow, that looks good.
That is interesting. So there's definitely, I think, some truth to part of what you said there, in terms of like, it wasn't appreciated at the time, but we look back at it now in terms of like, oh, that was way ahead of everything that was done before. Like, it wasn't appreciated for what it was because it wasn't what everyone else was doing, but now we look back and we like that better than the popular art of the time, because we're like, oh, we think that looks better now. I'm specifically thinking of pieces that I can't name because I'm not quite that much of an art aficionado, but I do know that there are various artworks that like their use of perspective was, decades, if not centuries ahead of the time. Because that's something that's developed, throughout the years in art, is use of perspective, use of honestly more scientific methods for staging artwork. Like a lot of I was talking with a friend the other day about how if you look at historical paintings of babies, generally
Okay.
looks weird. We'll put it that way because some people may appreciate it, and I don't necessarily want to offend anyone. But in my own opinion, babies look weird when they were painted,
Okay.
decades, centuries ago. Really centuries ago is what I'm talking about, because I feel like a lot of times you'll look up pictures. Either their faces look like adults, so it's an adult face on a what you would think of as a baby body, or they have really distinct muscle tone, which is something, in reality you just don't see on a baby. And if it were better, I would just bring up pictures and other people could see what I'm talking about. But for this one, they'll just have to go Google it themselves. Like I think you
I'm
might
seeing
have.
enough right now.
Yeah.
Holy crap.
Where it's very interesting. And it's you sort of like, have they never seen a baby before? And I don't think that's what it is. I think it's just we take for granted so much of what they learned, they being the plural, just over and over. Eventually someone was like, oh, here are some things that'll help you, like techniques that'll help you paint a baby, for instance, like, they don't have muscle tone, so let's, it's easier to draw muscle tone because you can picture where muscles go and you sort of put that into a body. For a baby, it's not quite like that because babies don't have muscle tone unless there's something wrong or they're Superman's child. So like seeing a baby with a six-pack, which I've definitely seen in a painting, is just very unnerving. But it's something like they didn't have the technique for drawing an infant until, someone came along and did it. And now everyone's like, oh, that's how you draw a baby. We'll just do it that way. And it looks more like a baby. Because it's sort of it's the same phenomenon as like trying to draw a portrait. I am terrible. And I know it's one of the harder things to do, especially as like an amateur artist, is to draw a face correctly. And it's such an odd concept because like you just look at someone's face and you're like, oh, I should be able to at least approximate some lines here to get the face right. And normally it just looks like a Picasso. Insofar as that would be great if that's what I was going for, but it never is.
You're talking realistic drawing.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I wasn't going for that. I was going for, closer to an image of what I'm looking at. And no one's going to get that. I could never be a, whatever that's called, a suspect sketch artist. Would not work out.
Yeah.
Crime would be rampant. Everyone would run.
There's a lady who wrote a book then, I can't remember the lady's name, but the book is Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain. And one of her big things is, one of her ideas that she promotes and that I think she's had some success adapting her teaching styles to is that when it comes to drawing things like faces, your idea of what a face looks like gets in the way of what's actually in front of you, and that's what leads to that disconnect. For example, you go to draw a baby's face and you're like, oh, the baby has a face. I know how to draw a face. And you draw a face and it looks like you drew an old man onto a baby, right? Yeah. Versus like just, and again, I'm not her. I don't know exactly how she would phrase it, but
Dr. Betty Edwards, it looks like.
That one, yeah. Yep.
Give them. I have not heard of this, but it sounds very interesting.
It is. But one of the things that she gets at is, drawing is presumably as old, if not, no, I would say as old as language. I don't think she makes a case that it's older than language. But there's no way to tell. Like, you can't really make a firm case either way, right?
I wasn't there.
Right, and no one was. And there's no evidence, like, spoken language doesn't fossilize, and all we've got are cave drawings. And, if those are anything like the scribbles I make on a day-to-day basis, why would I save those,
Right.
But anyway, her case is that, people can draw in the same way that they can speak. It's just a matter of learning how. And one of those big things is not letting what you think is in front of you distract you from what's actually in front of you. And on that basis, you would think that, if it's the same, if it's a set of skills that people should be able to pick up and learn, why would historical technique changes lead to what is obviously a vast improvement in people's ability to draw babies? Like, if it really is just drawing what's in front of you, why the heck do the babies painted 100 something years ago look like
works of nightmare?
Yeah.
The horror on your face tells me that you're still looking at them. I would recommend not doing that.
You're right.
They will fill your nightmares.
Yeah.
No offense to the babies at the time, because I'm sure
I
they
thought
were
Chucky
lovely.
was bad. Oh.
They got nothing. At least Chucky looks a bit like a baby. A very abused baby, but a baby.
That and obviously a doll. Like, you know it's a doll. You know it's not supposed to be a real baby. Oh.
It's clearly not real. I don't know what we're talking about. But no, and then, so another thing to, I guess, back to that whole, why, I guess this was my question, which may be incorrect even in its premise, why are they, why do they get famous after they die?
Mm-hmm.
I guess the other part of it to consider is maybe they didn't get famous after they died, but they're the only ones we remember. So, like, it could be that, they were famous, and I don't think this is always true. I think there are artists that they did something that wasn't popular at the time that now we think of or we appreciate more.
Right. I think Van Gogh is a good example of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Wildly, like, reviled might even be the right word in his time, just as someone who was, like, good for nothing, painted crap, and, like, there's an exhibit going around now that just has, like, such a huge following. Like, they've got his stuff, like, projected onto walls and stuff. He shows up time and again in, like, pop culture as, like, the misunderstood artist, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I think you also have people like Michelangelo, who was so well known in his time, even then, like, he was requisitioned to do great works of art that obviously we still enjoy and still look at.
Yeah, we still
review. And everyone's like, yep, that's still good,
Right. No, I think that's true. Van Gogh's, I think, a good one, though, because they definitely... And I think a lot of Impressionist, Post-Impressionist era artists probably suffered from a similar phenomena where I feel like Impressionist at the time was just intentionally not realistic, whereas I think prior to that, and art historians can probably disagree with me because I'm sure I'm getting some of this wrong, but my recollection is a lot of, prior to Impressionists, it was a lot of, trying to paint realistically, trying to capture exactly what you're seeing exactly as it is, and that was purveyed as, that was quality. Basically, the idea that, if you could paint a picture, that was perfect. That was what you were going for. And then I think Impressionist was kind of the first movement where it was intentionally not trying to capture that same idea of we want it to look. I mean, obviously didn't know what a photo was at the time, but looking back now, we wanted to look, instead of making it look like a photo, let's add a different style to it. Let's make it look different intentionally. And I feel like there was a lot of pushback from, the establishment artistry at the time. That common phrase we all talk about in history. But actually, though, sort of, it was a new thing, and people were like, "Oh, that doesn't make sense because this isn't what we view as talent." So it's not going to. So it wasn't as popular until we look back now and like, okay, now that we have photos that can, and again, not that there isn't artistry in photography. Case in point, my photos look like crap. But now that we have that, ability, that technology, there is additional value in adding, a different interpretation of an image as opposed to just trying to recreate it.
No, that makes sense to me. Up until the Impressionists, everyone was going for realism. I think another thing about the draw of realism is that it's easier to tell skill when you have when they're trying to match something and you can compare it and you're like, well, that looks exactly like that. He did a good job, or that doesn't look anything like what he was going for at all. With an impressionist painting, you look at it and you're like, well, what were they going for? And who's to say, right? I did do a quick Google search. It does look like the camera was invented before the impressionist movement.
Really? Well,
So
there we go.
not super long before. So I am wondering
Not
if
the
maybe
first thing
the
I'll get wrong.
I am wondering if maybe I thought they were really close. Maybe the invention of the camera could have contributed to that, in that, well, what's the point of trying to draw if I can never draw it as well as a camera? Don't get me wrong, the first cameras, I'm sure like a talented artist could do better. But
No.
You're right that I think the emphasis changed, and maybe some people at the time like weren't ready for that, and looking back, we see that now, because it's our new idea of quality isn't tied to realism in the same way.
It's not titled to just strict accuracy, because that's a good point. Like if you tell someone, if you have 3 students draw a square, and one draws a perfect square with 90-degree angles, you're gonna think that one's better than the person who drew a pentagon.
Or like a trapezoid or whatever,
They didn't connect it. That's easier to judge as, oh, well, clearly student one is the best. Whereas, now it's more about what it makes you feel than it is what it actually is, which I think ties nicely back to a lot of modern art, where it isn't, even more so now, it's harder to judge quality. Not that we always should be, because again, there can be a great, something can make, a piece of art can make you feel something so profound and yet not be traditionally, high quality. But I guess that's part of art, right? It's and at least what part of art is at this moment. It's so much more about, at least for me, what it makes me feel, what it makes me think, than always what's on the canvas or what is heard for less traditional media or less traditional art. Because actually, speaking to the Modern Art Museum I went to fairly recently, there was, I guess, a mixed media piece is how it's classified now, where there was a soundtrack. You would walk into a room and there was a soundtrack along with art that was just displayed on the wall. I personally thought the painting was really good. I don't remember the name of it. I may have to look it up and include it in the thumbnail, because I want to give it credit. But the basic idea is that it was, sort of a more traditionally, I think, very impressive painting. There was a full wall of it. And then there's also a soundtrack that, and I'm not sure if this was the intention or not, but it was basically as I went, from left to right, as a traditional English reader, the soundtrack kind of didn't literally point, but pointed me metaphorically to various points in the artwork, and it sort of matched up really nicely. And I think that was the intent. I think I got a little bit lucky, entering the room at the right time, because obviously that
if they don't sync up,
they don't sync up, you're going to be a problem. I think there were, if I can't remember if there were actual instructions to do that, or if the intent was just you would go in and get what you get, but also just you would stay long enough to sort of appreciate that. On the flip side, there's another piece that was, I think, probably took longer to set up. It was basically a wall of TVs. It was, I think, and they were the old cathode ray tube TVs, so big, chunky. These things. Like, you could kill
somehow.
them
That's what I imagined.
And I think, and maybe because that's what you would use as artwork now, it would be weird if it was just a bunch of flat screens.
That's
but
its
it was
own thing, yeah.
Right, but it was a wall of TVs, and there were a ton of images running. And it was, I think, intentionally chaotic, because it wasn't the same video on every TV. It was, related but different soundtracks and visuals. And for me, it was just overwhelming chaotic. I kind of just looked at it for a little bit and walked out, didn't like it. But I'm sure that took far longer to set up than the other one. Because the other one was, again, very nice artwork, but it was a small artwork, and then they did a print on the wall. Like the wall wasn't the full actual painting. It was a print that they put up. But that's the one I definitely enjoyed more, just because I felt something different, whereas the other one, again, for other people, I'm sure they get more from the intentionally chaotic, mess of just noise. But for me, it was just overwhelming. I was sort of like, yep, I'm out. So again, in one way, I think the one, not to say it was higher quality, but it definitely took a larger amount of effort and work put into it, at least to set it up, because there is also that element of the time it takes to think of something, to generate the idea. Because it reminds me of a big thing with graphic design, which, similar to modern art, isn't always the most complex, but it's specifically for like branding. I know, talking to a couple of graphic designers who work with businesses to sort of brand and advertise. A lot of times it'll be a design meeting where they'll sit down with an executive or someone whoever's making the decision, picking the actual logo or whatever, and they'll basically, like, sometimes they'll come with a portfolio and lay that out for the business, but other times, and I think people maybe don't do this as much because this is the reaction, but they'll go with an idea, but they'll actually sketch out logos for the exec, and they'll take real-time feedback and try and fix it. And they'll do that in a very quick procession because you can do a sketch like that, and they're also very good at it. But that leads to the reaction of like, well, why am I paying you all this money if you just drew it in 5 seconds? And the best response I've ever heard to that was like, it took me 5 seconds to draw. It took me 5 years to learn how to draw and think like this. So like, it's not always just the actual effort of putting pen to paper. It's coming up with the idea, learning how to do that. But yeah, it does feel like art has continued to evolve as I think technology has, because things, back to that whole, I think there's less of a focus on realism for most popular art, not all obviously, but most, because technology can capture what we used to use painting for. It feels like it's developed into this weird, well, not weird, but different space of not what you're looking at, but what you feel.
And I think, tying it back to kind of where we diverged, I think that feeling is part of that posthumous, whatever, recognition that many artists get. I think that that the ability of their work to provoke a feeling of some kind of or another, whether they were liked in the moment or not, I think that feeling is probably what keeps them relevant, keeps them popular, or makes them popular after the fact, as people are exposed to it and realize, oh, Starry Night makes me feel this way, or his pictures of sunflowers make me feel this other way, whereas, if the meaning of your piece is tied maybe to an explicit meaning, or if it is completely lost my train of thought. That's okay. I think that feeling is what gives it the staying power, and possibly more important than quality. I mean, from what I understand, Van Gogh was trying to draw realistically and couldn't quite make it. That could be wrong. I'm not an expert by any sense of the word.
We put it out in the world. It has to be real now.
Yeah. But I mean, even poor art might make it just for the reason that it evokes such a feeling, And that's not to say there's no advantage to it being good art, right? I mean, that would be silly. But maybe that's the reason why some people are rediscovered after they're dead, or never fade to begin with, just because, I mean, I'm trying to think of a good way to summarize it, but I've got nothing. This is why I'm not a writer.
Yeah, no, I think you're onto something there insofar as it maybe is more like the reason that an artist continues to stay relevant, or the pieces that continue to stay relevant are more
That's
about
fair.
the lasting impression that they make than the original subject matter that they were. and again, Van Gogh's a good example of that. But even like Michelangelo, who was popular at the time, continues to be so. Maybe continues to be so for a slightly different reason, insofar as that it is more, it's less about the level of quality or the level of realism that he captured, and it's more about what his, artwork continues to say and continues to make people feel.
Yeah. And I mean, the impression I get when I look, that's fun. When I look at Michelangelo, a piece, a lot of his works are awe-inspiring. And to be fair, I think a lot of his works were like for religious reasons, religiously,
Certainly.
what's the word? Requested. When someone asks you to do something for them, requisitioned? I don't know. The church asked him to do a lot of art for them, right?
Yes.
And so naturally they would want some of that awe to come through, right? I mean, if you've got a statue of David, first king of Israel, you want him to look like a king should look, right? And a king should come with awe. If you're doing like, was Michelangelo the Sistine Chapel? Yeah.
Yes.
If you're doing that, you want some feeling of awe to come through. And I think it still does. Even if you aren't that into the whole Christian thing, you look at a work like that as complex or just as astoundingly realistic as a statue made out of stone, I mean, that's impressive and awe-inspiring for maybe a different reason than it was originally intended. Holy crap, how did somebody do that? And then you have like other pieces. Salvador Dali, he was the guy with the melting clocks. Don't even know what that piece is supposed to mean, but don't know. I'm pretty sure he was one of the more politically minded artists. No idea what his political stance was, but the image he made of clocks melting everywhere is. I don't remember his politics. I remember that picture and that feeling of looking at that picture. More than anything else. Picasso is another one. I don't remember anything about Picasso other than how I feel looking at his work. And the thing about his work is it's not even work I like, right? Like not a big Picasso fan.
Really? Okay.
Not a big fan of his later work, I should say, when it gets a little crazy. But on the same note, I'm sure as heck not going to forget it, which is kind of interesting. Maybe you feel that way about like the TV one, didn't like it at all, but I'll probably remember that for a good long time,
And I may remember it longer than the pieces I actually stopped and was like, oh, I like that. Like that's something I would put on my wall versus the TVs, which I'm not putting on my wall because I don't think you could take it. But that's a good point. I think, obviously only time will tell what continues to stick in the mind and stay relevant for even future generations. I don't know.
Which is a whole nother thing, because then you get like the generational changes and passing down, and in order for someone, like it's got to come up again for that previous generation. It can't just, I don't know. It's a whole different additional can of worms. Gosh. Culture is weird, man.
That's quite the statement, and not a bad one to end on. What would your advice be to a small child who wants to be a popular artist? Go.
Just do it. I would let them know that, if they want to be popular while they're alive, that's maybe. No, but like, I mean, that's a weird thing, I guess, to tell a child, but I would tell them, look, it's not always. You can't force somebody to be ready. Oh gosh, this is getting into just life stuff. Oh gosh,
no,
you can't force your audience to be ready for you, right? But whatever you paint or draw or photograph or whatever, someone will find it appealing, and if you do it well, and if it brings out the emotion which everyone has, then it'll stick. That seems to be how art sticks. Quality is always something to be pursued, and like that's all you can do is yourself, right?
No,
So
that's really well put. I don't even have anything to add.